One is, you likely heard that President Trump has officially made the announcement that America is withdrawing from the World Health Organization. They have the acronym of WHO, but I'm going to keep saying World Health Organization because otherwise it's confusing. But the World Health Organization was among the main parties that America says was not helpful in the early phases of coronavirus. World Health Organization seems to be under the control of China. We were just talking with Gordon Chang about China. World Health Organization seeming to be manipulated or at least subservient to China, and China trying to hide the outbreak of coronavirus from the World Health Organization. Statements early on by the World Health Organization indicating that this coronavirus was no big deal, don't worry about it. And so our President Trump has been unhappy with World Health Organization really for quite a while. He announced in April that we Americans are going to withhold money from China. We're going to hold back and not necessarily and not pay our portion toward World Health Organization. As with many organizations, international organizations, America seems to bear the brunt. America bears the brunt of the expense of the World Health Organization. So President Trump actually gave notice. To be precise, the notice he gave now in July of 2020 actually means that in 1 year from now, July 2021, the withdrawal of America would actually take place. So it's really a notice of withdrawal. And obviously in 2021 and a year from now, you'll either have President Trump still in office and he will follow through, or you have candidate Biden, who really isn't going to be in charge of anything, but they're pretending he's really the candidate. But I digress. Biden has said he will actually, if he becomes president, would put America back in the World Health Organization. But I want to talk about the World Health Organization. By the way, on our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop-down list of links, you can read these articles that lay out details and facts about why America became so unhappy and so concerned with the World Health Organization. A pattern of deceit was one term used by people that talk about the way the World Health Organization handled the coronavirus problem. So I want to go back and talk just a little bit about the founding, the beginning of World Health Organization, which was the idea that the World Health Organization was supposed to be, it came out of the UN, I think it was 1948, I'm not sure the year, I think 1948, but in any case, the idea of it was like a place where you could gather data about health threats around the world in one place. And so it was a very cooperative notion. If we had one organization that was collecting data, and so you'd learn early on about, for example, a virus coming out of China. You would learn the symptoms, how it's being handled, how fast it spread, what are they finding, seems to be effective in treating it. You would have information from countries around the world. So it's a great thing to come together and have countries share information, like a central clearinghouse for information. It has appeared to many people over the past, especially half a year, 6 months or more, that we've been dealing with coronavirus, that it is a very political machine, that the World Health Organization was not simply doing the job of assembling and distributing information, but instead seemed to be more political in nature, seeming to kowtow to China's efforts to hide what happened with the coronavirus, and President Trump unhappy with that, complaining about that. It's a funny thing. I was thinking about getting ready for today's show. It is a great thing, of course, to have cooperation and shared information with countries around the world on all sorts of issues. It's a great thing. You want to understand. There's no one trying to argue that America should live in a bubble and not interact, that we should be isolationists, that we shouldn't share any information with anybody ever. No one is arguing that. But 1948, when it was created, the World Health Organization began when there was not an internet, when there was not the instant availability of information, simply that didn't exist. So now when you think about it, I'm not saying that the world shouldn't have some organization like World Health Organization, but as many international organizations do and just trend and happen to turn into, you have those organizations vulnerable, susceptible to the bullies of the world, who think they're going to run things, they're going to decide. For example, China, probably, maybe along with Russia, but China at this point, one of the main bullies of the world. bullies of the world who want to take over, as you hear from Gordon Chang talk about, and bullies of the world who are trying to tell World Health Organization what they ought to do. And so, to be really clear, President Trump, in his announcement also, he did not say that America is going to stop helping people with the health issues around the world. In fact, he was explicit in saying we are going to continue to help people in trouble spots, to share information, to deliver what is needed. We're not withdrawing from the world and saying, because we're not going to be part of World Health Organization, we're not withdrawing from the world and saying we're just leaving everyone, abandoning them. We'll continue to be United States of America. We'll continue to share information. We'll continue to help people. We'll continue to ship both, needed supplies, probably doctors and nurses and healthcare information. We'll continue to do that. The question is whether we do it as a nation to nation or nation to even peoples versus through the intermediary of the World Health Organization, which seems to have, over the last 6 months, become susceptible to corruption and control by the Chinese government. So I urge you to read more of the details of what the challenges were with the World Health Organization. But it's been described. In fact, there's a great article you can read on our website, AmericaCanBeTalked.org, called "The Pattern of Deceit at the World Health Organization." But I didn't want to spend the whole time on this because I want to really jump in. I will say one more thing. There are, of course, a chorus of complaints from the Democrats in Washington that President Trump was withdrawing from the World Health Organization. How could he do this in the middle of a pandemic? Number one, the withdrawal is effective a year from now. So he's not withdrawing during the pandemic. Number two, this is the Democrat, means it is their reason for living and breathing and waking up every morning is to find something to criticize and complain about President Trump. Some Republicans, Lamar Alexander being one of the more prominent ones who is finally getting out of Washington, and he had a parting shot at President Trump about withdrawing from the World Health Organization. But I think people who are really more tuned in at the higher level of the thinking about what the Trump election meant in 2016, what the Trump agenda is, the mission is, can see this withdrawal from World Health Organization in the higher light that it deserves to be thought about. And that is this. America, the free, the wonderful, the brave, the great, the America of the founding of our Declaration of Independence and Constitution, as we have progressed through the time of our founding, we have, of course, been through many phases in history. We've been through phases in history where we had world wars. We had to deal with figuring out how involved to be in world wars. We had formation of various international organizations. We had, before the United Nations came along, which I'll mention in a moment, talk about them, we had the League of Nations, which was one effort to try to make an international body, and it didn't work well. For a variety of reasons, it fell apart. We got to the United Nations. And I'm making all these points to say that in the grand scope of world history, we have international organizations. We sometimes change. America might pull out of them. The entire organization disbands, comes together as something new. This is not just one frozen moment of time in which we had an all-powerful and perfect World Health Organization that was shattered by President Trump refusing to continue to support it. This is what the left tries to get you to do, is focus on this one little moment in time. We had World Health Organization. Now look what Trump has gone to do, because he's whatever they would characterize him, because he doesn't understand the beauty of the international organizations. He doesn't understand, these great men went before him and set these great things up, and he's causing it to all fall apart. Part of what President Trump brought to Washington was this, we use the term in America, drain the swamp, was just, to get the encrusted, old, hanging on to power, and in some cases very deep state, clinging to power, leftist, the uniparty concept in Washington. President Trump really came into Washington to say, we are going to clean the slate. We are going to look at America's founding, what the point of America is, the beauty of America, the freedom of America, and we're not just going to go along with things as they've always been just because the predecessors to President Trump went along with things as they had always been and went along with every new international organization that came into being. And so President Trump is more willing than past presidents to look at what is the reason for this organization? Do we need it? Can we accomplish purposes without it? Is it in some way impeding what we're trying to do as a country? Because these organizations are artificially created organizations. They're just ideas somebody had at some point, and countries came together and created these organizations, but they're not necessarily the best way to go forward to solve the problems of world health challenges, to enable exchange of information. They're not necessarily the best way. They are most certainly not the only way. And so the idea of President Trump continuing to feel as though the World Health Organization did not handle this crisis well, in fact, impeded because of their providing wrong information to the world, seemingly at the hands of China, the idea that President Trump would say, you know what, we're just going to step back from this organization. We'll still help the world, we'll still ship supplies, we'll still share our knowledge, we'll still help out with financial assistance where needed, but there's no magic formula that says it must be done through this particular entity. But the Democrats in Washington, of course, have pounced because this is yet another example of trying to point out what an outsider, what an ignorant guy Trump is, because doesn't he know, everybody knows, the World Health Organization, best thing ever. And this is President Trump saying, no, I'm going to think for myself. And America is going to think for itself. We don't have to stay in some organization that no longer serves its purpose, may not be needed, and in fact may be jaded and corrupt. We don't have to keep playing in that ball, it's to stay in that lane, because that's the lane that our predecessor, we did in the past in America. We can actually be in the lane that thinks, the lane that reasons. It says, let's move forward, and maybe not necessarily with every single thing done exactly how it's been done in the past. Same kind of thinking applies to the United Nations. I don't know whether there will be any serious discussion about whether or not America will remain in the United Nations. I completely understand the value of an international organization, far more value the United Nations has than a World Health Organization. The United Nations kind of a place to come together as nations and talk and understand, listen to each other. Obviously, a place where leaders of various countries can grandstand to beat the band. They can show up at the United Nations and take that podium and, spout their belief in whatever it is they believe in, and spout the greatness of their country. And the United Nations has a podium for every country. And President Trump did a brilliant speech about America at the United Nations. I think he's done 2, maybe even 3. Anyway, his most recent one was particularly stellar. The point is, the United Nations has a purpose like that. But even the United Nations is, again, a product of a decision of a series of nations over time to say, this looks pretty, this is a good way to get together, this is a good way to talk. We're going to come together and we're going to share our ideas and maybe provide a platform for nations to, and does allow things like UN forces to get in the middle of skirmishes in countries before they turn into wars. So you've had UN forces on the ground in various places. And so it has a bit of a peacekeeping purpose, and maybe that's a good purpose too. But United Nations also, like other international organizations, not necessarily rooted in a set of principles and values like America is rooted in a sense of a particular set of principles and values. United Nations, if you had to say what is their founding principle and value, it's kind of like, can't we all just get along? Can't we find a way to keep peace? Not with principles behind it, not with principles like America has behind it, but a concept, we're going to try to keep peace. But here we are now in 2020 with the United Nations. They have, just as one little example, my very fine friends, you have the UN Human Rights Council. We've talked about this before in this show. United Nations Human Rights Council. You could say, wow, this is a great thing. An organization that is supposed to be dedicated to helping nations understand each other and get along and be better countries. And here you go. You have this beautiful thing within the UN Human Rights Council. And yet, the worst abusers, countries that are the worst abusers of the human rights of their own people, get elected to serve on the Human Rights Council. You have to understand the absurdity of that. This is an international organization trying to send this signal of being high-minded. We're the ones going to save the world from all the bad guys. We're the ones to help bring peace, justice, and fairness to the world. And so we have Human Rights Council, and you have a country, this is a couple of years ago, but it's a really good example. Eritrea, generally one of the worst human rights abusers in the world. The country of Eritrea is now on the Human Rights Council, along with Saudi Arabia, was or is. And the point being, at some point you can have all the grandiose ideas about the United Nations. You can have all the grandiose, visions of what a great thing it could be. If the facts on the ground are that the United Nations is, in one sense, complicit with the rights abusers of this world by elevating their governments to serve on the UN Human Rights Council while those same governments are abusing their own people, then the UN has become no longer fulfilling the role that it was intended to fill. I am not necessarily advocating for dropping out of the UN. I know lots of people say you have to have something, UN's better than nothing, and other people saying drop out, what a joke. But I will say that I want our country, America, to be the independent thinker. It is a time for thinkers in this country. It's a time for thinkers who will say, we don't just stay in the lane we've always been in. We don't just stay in the lane that says, well, we've been part of the UN, and so we're going to stay part of the UN. I don't know if we should drop out or not, but I think we should not feel as though our decision to remain or not is dictated because there's no other choice around, or because in the past we've always been part of the UN and we sure don't want to cause it problems. We, America, largely fund the UN. We get criticized by the UN. The United Nations regularly mistreats the country of Israel. I don't have the number in front of me, but it's some enormous percentage of all of the times that the United Nations Security Council or the UN generally has voted to denounce a country for wrongdoing. It's a very high percentage of those times. It is Israel. So it is an anti-Semitic entity, the United Nations, anti-Semitic, always picking on Israel, always condemning Israel. America can't stop it all the time. And you have an organization which doesn't have foundational principles other than claiming, can't we all get along? So what happens in the can't we all get along mindset is that whoever's the biggest bully wins. So you have another problem with the UN, which is a conglomeration of the Islamic countries in this world. So you have a small subset, a significant but small subset within the United Nations made up of the Islamic countries of this world, regularly pushing the Islamic agenda, regularly pushing the Islamist agenda, regularly pushing the idea that no one can ever criticize Islam. They don't care what any other religions criticize, but there is an Islamic agenda pushed in the UN, no comparable agenda, no comparable group of nations pulling together to say, well, we want to actually stand up for Judeo-Christian values. We want to stand up for the freedom of America. That doesn't really exist in the UN. So what I really want to wrap up this whole segment about the UN and the World Health Organization is it is a great thing for America to always be freshly looking at the commitments we make. It's like what the company we keep, the organizations we support, to look at what those organizations are doing today. What values are they standing for? Are they corrupt or are they not corrupt? Because this is part of preserving America. It's one of the many things, the ideas behind the reason that President Trump won election back in 2016 and why I believe he'll win again in 2020 is because it was a reassertion of the idea, the uniqueness, the extraordinary idea, the exceptional idea of America and American sovereignty. And American sovereignty means that we decide for ourselves our laws, our values. We do not submit our sovereignty or surrender our sovereignty to the United Nations or any other group. And when those groups become simply more corrupt than they are helpful, the idea that America would say, we're not going to be part of it, we're not going to support, we're not going to help it. These are steps forward to preserving America. And they're ultimately steps forward in helping those organizations recognize that they cannot simply continue a bullying or a false agenda, a wrong agenda, and continue to expect America to trot along and keep on writing checks. President Trump is stepping up for the idea of America, and I think it's great.